Hey, how's it going? It's your boy Adam Warrior Yow's Challenger Coach here to bring you the 10.8 High-ELO tier list. But before we start, we have just launched our Tobii eye tracking inside of our desktop app. By understanding where you look during every second of a game, we can tell more about how you play. Have you ever wondered how often you actually look at the minimap? Or how about how long you tend to tunnel vision onto a single object? Or how well you prepare for a fight by checking cooldowns, or even how often you get caught out? Well, you'll get a post-game report for each of these and a brand new GPI scores to go along with it. Not to mention, to celebrate, you can get 20% off a Tobii eye tracker and 3 months of premium by using the code Mobalytics, but you can also find way more information and cool comparisons on our dedicated website. Starting up in the top lane, our S tier roster will be Wukong, Set, Maokai, Fiora, and the God tier will be Renekton and Jax. For the changes, we got Fiora from A tier to S tier. She's got that 59% win rate, 8% pick rate in Masters Plus with a lot of favorable matchups in the meta. You got things like into Aatrox, she's good, into Jax, into Set, into Darius, into Maokai. Yeah, you're getting the picture, she's a beast right now. Malphite, funny enough, after Fnatic Bwipo showed it off as a counter to the 200 years of balance, or really any mobile AD carry, his popularity skyrocketed to around 6% pick rate and 54% win rate, which is the highest I've ever seen it in High-ELO. Aatrox, despite his popularity in competitive, does a lot worse in solo queue due to how his counter picks like Fiora, Renekton, or even Jax are way more popular, dropping his win rate significantly lower on this patch, which is very similar to what happened to Camille, so we dropped them both from S to A tier. Tryndamere, Akali will also drop from A to B tier as they aren't really good enough at abusing Conqueror, Death Dance, or Bork compared to the other meta top laners, so they are declining in win rate and popularity. That means that our first highlighted champion will be our first God tier champion for the High-ELO solo queue list, and that's going to be Renekton. Hate him in competitive play personally, and he just does awful in the late game, which is why. But the laning phase, he is extremely oppressive. He's just that kind of win lane, win game type of thing, which is way better in solo queue where people's mentals are a lot weaker. He's always been like this, but ever since people in High-ELO have adopted the Bork into Black Cleaver into Death Dance third build, he has become the most popular top lane pick with a 13% pick rate, but still holds a 54% win rate, which is truly amazing. So if you're looking for a meta champion in the top lane, definitely Renekton's your go-to. My man, or specifically Tree Man, Maokai is going to go from A tier to S tier as it's his time to shine. He's been extremely strong for a lot of months now, and he's been around the 54 to 55% win rate, but it's only now that his pick rate is caught up to a whopping 8%, because, let's be honest here, top laners just hate picking him. So he's got to be extremely strong for people to even think about picking him, and he is right now because he is the strongest tank and anti-carry in the top lane. He just denies the melee heavy dive champ meta that is so popular right now in High-ELO, and he's just a super consistent pick. He's kind of really strong right now because of the same reasons Poppy is really strong, which, not coincidentally, she is also on the rise. In terms of matchups, he's good versus most bruiser champions like Riven, Jax, Pantheon, people who rely on dashes for CC, but, he also does well at surviving and outscaling range matchups, besides Vladimir, of course, but he's gonna lose really hard to Cho, who is receiving a buff soon, or juggernauts like Mordekaiser, so just keep those matchups in mind. Urgot hasn't really reached his God status of old, but he is coming back to the meta and will slot into A tier for now. The reason for it is, of course, his buffs. Like I always say, CC duration buffs always make a champion really strong, and then you combine that with some nice bug fixes to make the champion more smooth, and he's in a really good place. In terms of what Urgot's really good at, he's that anti-melee champion who is one of the few ranged champions who is still able to abuse Death Dance, which is all what top lane is pretty much about right now. As for his matchups, he has some really good ones into Pantheon, Riven, Camille, Singed, Aurelia, and his worst matchup is Vlad. He does awful in that matchup, or funny enough, he does really bad into tanks because he doesn't actually have the damage to kill them, and then they have way more utility than he does, and he gets outscaled. He's much better versus bruisers, where he's tanky enough to survive against their all-ins and does enough damage to actually kill them. In the mighty jungle, our S tier roster is going to be Elise, Echo, Rek'Sai, Lead, Singa, Rengar, and in God tier, we've got Karthus and Graves. That's pretty unsurprising, to be honest. As for the changes to the list, we've got Wizard Dragon Girl Shyvana from B tier to A tier as the jungle XP changes allow her to scale more consistently, which is pretty much the theme for the jungle this patch. As you'll note, Nunu will also go from B tier to A tier as a strong scaling option who happens to be one of the only winning matchups stat-wise versus Graves. This one's going to be a little bit weird, but Fiddlesticks is going to go from off the list to A tier, and it might be a bit of a surprise too, but after the XP changes, people learning him and some hotfix buffs to his damage, he sits at around a 60% win rate in Masters Plus, but only a 2% pick rate, so it is a small sample size, but we still think he's either A- or B+. We'll have to see once his pick rate actually picks up. Due to the jungle changes, these three champions, Pantheon, Amumu, and Nocturne, all took win rate and play rate hits that were big enough to send them to the Shadow Realm, so, peace out. Although Pantheon may return sooner than the others, as he's been doing a lot better competitive play compared to solo queue though. Our first highlighted champion is going to be the God King of the jungle. He's going to go from S tier to God tier with the 60% win rate, the 10% play rate. Yeah, it's Karthus. Already considered a God tier solo queue champion before those jungle changes actually came in due to his ability to farm faster than pretty much anyone else, scale better than almost any other jungler, and he's got that global pressure for people who just forget he's in the game because guess what, he's not ganking that often. So for whatever reason, he just, to my own surprise, did not receive a nerf when the jungle changes were going to favor champions that like to farm and do nothing, and then yeah, he's probably ascended past God tier right now. Luckily enough, he is going to receive some nerfs on the preceding patch. I just think it's a little bit weird that people didn't really see this coming in the balancing department and decided not to nerf him until now. I'm hoping the nerfs are really strong because I'm very much tired of playing as Karthus jungle all the time. Luckily, gods do bleed in League of Legends though, so if you want to beat up a Karthus, some winning matchups are actually Rengar and Evelynn, while Kindred and Kha'Zix do fairly well as well. Even Rengar are just champions as well as Kha'Zix who are able to invade the Karthus and kill him because he's not really going to get Zhonya's too early into the game, while Kindred pretty much just negates Karthus' ultimate, which is going to be really nice for her, and she scales. Next up, we got Rengar going from A tier to S tier with that 60% win rate, 5% pick rate, and 15% ban rate, which is actually higher than Karthus's. Those jungle XP changes were so good for people who like to passively farm until 6, and his win rate went up by around 3%, but unlike the other junglers, he's actually really good at invading and cheesing some kills early on and taking advantage of that solo XP increase, which is actually really good because if Rengar ever gets a solo kill off of invade, you're not really recovering from that. In terms of build, that Conquer Edge of Night setup that Scrubteam likes so much has been popping off lately, and I highly recommend it. It's pretty simple, you're just grabbing Conqueror, and then you're grabbing Edge of Night second to make it so that you're even more face roll when you leap in. In terms of matchups, Rengar really only struggles into Rek'Sai unless you do something weird like Poppy Jungle, which actually could work. As for jungle matchups, he absolutely stomps. He destroys the other cat jungler Nidalee or some of the other S tier champions like Elise. He does really well into her, and he is also a God Slayer since he does well into Karthus, so don't forget that. Our last highlight is going to be on my favorite jungler, Evelynn, who's going to go from B tier to A tier, as like most of the other farm to 6 assassin junglers in High-ELO, she did get a big boost from this patch and even went up around 3 to 4% in pick rate. For her build, the one on your screen is going to be her most common setup, but a lot of incredibly strong EVE players like Malice, who hit Korean Challenger with her with around a 70% win rate and 100 games on her as his most played champion, began to swap to Inspiration Second Night for free boots and Cosmic Insight. Personally, I've been testing it out and like it a lot, so you can try it out yourself. The other tip I want to give for Evelynn is Medjai's might as well be core on her. You should pick it up almost every single game. It's one of the things that allows her to snowball the best because she really uses that extra AP and the movement speed better than a lot of other champions. Matchup wise, she is a God Slayer as she beats Karthus, and she also does really well into tank junglers like Sejuani, for example, because her W is a Void Staff not just for herself but for her whole team, and she's got some crazy strong percent health damage and execute, which funny enough, this kind of thing actually allows her to beat Olaf. I mean, understandably she's gonna lose the early game to him, but when fights actually happen and Olaf uses his ultimate, she can just burst him down right through it. It's a really funny matchup. You should try it out. Also, you should really avoid the Rek'Sai Rengar matchups at all costs. Personally, I ban one, and if the other one is picked, I likely dodge. They're really not playable. Starting up in the mid lane, our S tier roster will be Casawin, Silas, Zoe, LeBlanc, Cassio, and in God tier, we've got Syndra and Katarina. For the changes, Orianna post buffs goes from B tier to A tier and ended up boosting her win rate just enough to make the jump. Malzahar, Corki, and Lucian all come from off the list to B tier as viable options to scale and kill frontlines, or I guess do whatever Lucian does, which is stomp lane and then pray. Aurelia is getting destroyed in the mid lane due to her poor matchups, and not even Bork Rush is saving her from a 48% win rate, so we dropped her from A tier to B tier, along with Rumble, who his spam roaming style and then share XP off of his kills in side lanes is not doing as well in this patch. Qiyana is another champion who relied heavily on spam roaming and getting kill XP from side lanes, which dropped her in popularity this patch to around only 5%, so we dropped her out of S tier to A+. Then we found out Nico has disguised herself as a mid laner for a bit too long, at least in solo queue, where she's been dropping in win rate till now, where she sits below 50%, so we shadow roamed her. That means that the first mid laner to ascend to God tier will be Syndra, who has a 56% win rate and the highest pick rate at 11%. Winning lane versus her is actually just far too difficult in solo queue, and she has so much kill pressure solo or with gank assist, even winning matchups require a jungler to play around them to even beat a Syndra. Combine that with amazing wave clear, she always has priority in lane, so she's able to roam and join skirmishes first, and if you try and follow her, if you dare follow her and you don't have vision, she's probably just gonna one-shot you. And that's just in the early game. During the mid game, she can likely just hit R and Q on you and you're just gonna die. So she is one of the best control mages, if not the best control mage for high and solo queue. In terms of matchups, she does struggle into Katarina and Echo, but their junglers actually need to be nearby to make sure that they can play aggressively on the Syndra to take advantage. Next up, we've got Cassiopeia, who's going to go from A tier to S tier. She's got that 59% win rate and around 9% pick rate, which makes her very close to a god tier champion if you only look at her stats. She has the best late game in terms of any solo queue mage due to her self-peel, tankiness, and DPS. I know I say this a lot because we tend to talk about Cassio a lot this season, but Miasma is way too clutch of a spell versus melee champions. Grounding effect is what makes this champion so strong right now, and it's why she can deal with so many different melee champions trying to dive her. One of her best strengths though is compared to other control mages, she is really strong at going in 1v2 or 1v3 and just outplaying when people even try and roam or gank her. In terms of matchup, she's strong versus any melee heavy comp, even with assassins, although you do have to worry a little bit in lane as she can get snowballed on. Or she's actually really good versus short range mages like Lissandra or even LeBlanc. Although she can struggle against stuff that outranges her like Vel'Koz, Victor, Orianna, Xerath, or stuff that roams because, you know, she has no boots and can't really follow, so things like Kiana, Pyke, Aurelion Sol, Echo, all those champions who just kind of abandoned the laning phase because Cassio's wave clear isn't that good early on is really strong versus her. Oh, Azir, you're up next. B tier to A tier is actually super impressive for this champion. He almost never does well in solo queue, and it shows because his win rate went above 50% for I think the first time this season in solo queue with around a 6% pick rate, which is one of the highest in mid lane out of any champion. In terms of his setup, his keystone is kind of up in the air. People are going Lethal Tempo, Conqueror, Comet, Halo Blades, it's all over the place, so I did some research to find out which one's the best. Halo Blades actually performs the worst out of all of them, so you probably shouldn't take it that often. Comet is used to bully lane in poke matchups where Azir might get a little bit outranged. Conqueror is the best performing one, but it is one of the least popular options, and then Lethal Tempo is the most consistent. Personally, I actually think Conqueror might be the best one, so I would try going that or Lethal Tempo. In terms of his matchups, he's strong versus champions that he outranges, so Orianna for example, especially those who don't have any mobility. He does lose to assassins in solo queue because he doesn't get that time to scale and people aren't really going to protect him. So things like LeBlanc are really good into him, Fizz is really good, or you can get outscaled by an assassin like Kassadin. That's a really good option. Moving down to the bot lane, our starting S tier roster will be Kai'Sa, Kalista, and in God tier we've got the Misfortunate Ezreal combo, and then also Varus. For the changes, we've got Twitch from B tier to A tier, as well as Cassio, who are some underplayed bot lane carries who have around 60% win rate but only 2% pick rate, so stats are inflated due to low sample size, but they're still really strong when mastered. Aphelios post nerfs took a really big hit this patch, going from a 53% win rate to a 51%, so we moved him down from S tier to A tier, though he might rise up again. It's pretty common for this guy to do that. Draven will move from S tier to A tier simply for play rate reasons. He's just not popular enough, at least for a bot laner, but he will likely return to S tier soon once people take the time to learn him and stabilize his win rate and experiment with his different builds at the moment. First up for highlights, let's talk about Varus going from S tier to God tier. He's got that 54% win rate and a 16% pick rate. He's been just destroying high-end solo queue and competitive play for a little bit now. The reason for that is he's actually got two amazing setups, which is really rare. He got his regular Bork setup with Runon's Hurricane to shred frontline heavy compositions, which are really common in solo queue, or when the enemy team is squishy and you want to snowball the laning phase, you can go Lethality, which is the most popular setup in Korea right now. Varus, even outside of that, even though he's a mobile, he is so lane dominant due to his range and poking ability. He even has that utility from the anti-heal, and his ultimate is great for setting up kills during the early game. I know I just talked about his ultimate and it was nerfed, so you might expect his win rate to actually go down, but it actually didn't because AD carry players, they don't land that ability. It's just a bonus if it happens. In terms of his matchups, he's really good into Caitlyn and Draven because if Draven tries to step up on him, Varus has the range and zoning ability to actually stop him from doing that. But he does happen to struggle into really mobile, aggressive bot laners like Kalista, for example, or even Syndra because Syndra just kind of sets up the stun and then Varus has no option and dies. Next up in the bot lane, we've got Tristana going from B tier to A tier because those damage buffs on her E were actually really good. It netted her a 7% pick rate and a 55% win rate in Masters Plus. Not only did those damage buffs actually help her, but she does have some pretty good meta matchups. She's really good into popular AD carries like Kalista because she can't outplay Tristana at all, really, and she is a God Slayer as she has a very good matchup into Ezreal, which is one of the primary reasons she's doing well right now because almost half the games of Ezreal anyways. Unfortunately, she has a bit of an issue versus the other god tier champion Misfortune, but you can just ban that out and you'll be totally fine. In terms of support pairing, she does really well with meta supports like Rakan, Barb, Blitzcrank, things that like to be aggressive and set her up, or she even does well with enchanters like Yuumi, Janna, and Lulu who can buff her up to 1v9 games during the mid game, because she's kind of awful during that state, but if you can snowball early on, get her through the mid game with some enchanter stuff, you know, that Ardent, the Lulu E, she can carry those late game fights pretty easily. Last change for the bot lane, we've got Xayah going from B tier to A tier. She's doing a little bit better now that comps are pretty dive heavy in the meta, because everyone is running these assassin champions, these dive heavy bruiser champions, and Xayah is actually able to peel for herself. Xayah is a champion that's just absolutely garbage when people are playing long range compositions, but when everyone is melee and everyone is diving towards you due to her E and the way her feathers work, she's really strong. She also has good synergy with popular supports like, I mean obviously Rakan, but also Thresh and Leona. Both of those champions like Rakan are really good at setting up for kills during the laning phase and are able to start teamfights for her during the late game, because one of the worst things with Xayah is you can't really start fights on your own. Even though she is moving to A tier, I'd put her at the bottom of A tier. She does struggle versus the god tier ADCs like Misfortune, Ezreal, but also can be countered by long range AD carries like Ashe, Varus, Caitlyn, and if her support matchup doesn't help her out at all, she's gonna get crushed during a laning phase. And don't forget, she is god awful into Draven, who is meta right now, so please watch out for that champion if you pick Xayah. On the other hand, she is good versus the aggressive short-range AD carries like Kai'Sa and Lucian, who are both incredibly popular in terms of pick rate right now, while being one of the few AD carries who also has a winning matchup in Yasuo bot lane, as she can deny him his engage window with her R. So if you're tired of losing to those people who just run like Yasuo Alistar, for example, try out Xayah. Lastly, for the support list, our S tier roster will be Senna, Lulu, Yuumi, and in the god tier, we've got Bard and Thresh. As for the changes, we actually don't have that many, since Riot doesn't really like touching support at the moment, besides, you know, I guess doing -5 or +5 to Leona or Nautilus Q. So the changes will be Galio to B tier from off the list, as he is a viable support at the moment. He's got roughly a 2% pick rate, but a 60% win rate in Masters Plus, so maybe we'll see him actually end up in A tier, but we'll have to see where his win rate settles when he gets more popular. If you do want to try him up, I highly recommend doing it with either Kalista or Misfortune bot lane for those juicy wombo combos. First up for our support highlight, we've got Thresh, who is going from S tier to God tier with a 55% win rate, 23% pick rate, the highest out of any support, and a 20% ban rate. Stat-wise, he's definitely ascended. Currently, pretty much a perfect support for solo queue. He's gonna win the laning phase due to his aggressive, you know, flash flay, which is almost no counterplay. He's really good at denying ganks with his flay, or just standing back to lantern their AD carry when they just for some reason really need that last caster minion and then Jarvan comes in to gank them. Well, that is if they click the lantern on time, which doesn't always happen, but still. He's also actually able to save his AD carry when they're too done to position well in a team fight thanks to Lantern. Lantern in general is just amazing in solo queue. He's able to set up picks extremely well during the mid to late game due to his hook. Overall, he's a really versatile support. He also has no losing matchups outside of Senna, who is pretty broken for the fasting Senna strat, so it hardly matters. Although it is true, Nautilus and Blitzcrank do okay into him, just not as well as what you would think for everyone saying that they're actually counters to Thresh. The only stuff that really can test him in terms of matchups is actually Bard, who is the other god tier champion, or Taric, who is able to outscale a Thresh during the teamfight phase. And next up for changes, we actually have Karma going from B tier to A tier. She has an 8% pick rate, which might surprise you, and a 56% win rate, which also might surprise you, considering that most people consider her to be not really viable at the moment at a high level. But she has even started to see competitive play in Asian regions like in the LCK, where Kyria, Dest's laning partner, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, has started to actually pick her up, and he was even voted the best young player in the LCK this year, so if he's playing Karma, there's probably something to it. She is a very strong champion when paired with poke or aggressive laners. Things like Ashe, Caitlyn, Varus, or even Draven Lucian, for example, do really well with her. She's one of the few enchanter supports to do well with mage bot laners as well. So if you end up with a Syndra, a Cassio, a Heimer, or Ziggs, Karma can do really well. Out of all of the enchanters though, she is the best at bullying the laning phase, although she does trade that for getting outscaled by the other enchanters, so just keep that in mind when picking her. Last up, we actually have Rakan, who is an A+ laner and extremely close to getting the S tier with a 56% win rate and a 9% pick rate. He gets kind of edged out by the other ones just because they're that much stronger than him. We would make an exception though for him if he was a God Slayer, but he kind of loses to Thresh and doesn't do that well in the Bard. It's a little bit even. He does also lose to Morgana, who's getting more popular. He loses to Lulu, he loses to Senna, who are both candidates for going to God tier pretty soon. Now, that might sound a little bit grim for our hero matchup-wise, but he isn't really a counterpick style champion. His strength is that he's extremely versatile, very similar to Thresh. He scales well due to being an enchanter, he's got sustain, he's got engage, his mobility is amazing, his ability to peel is also amazing. He just does everything pretty well, but the thing that he does the best and the thing that's winning him games is the fact that his engage is really strong. So it's not really about the laning phase for Rakan outside of, you know, the OP combination of Zy Rakan. It's about being able to engage teamfights and do a little bit of everything when he's needed. That's it, folks. Thanks everyone for watching the 10.8 High-ELO tier list. I'm your host, Adam Warrior Isles, and as always, be sure to check out our other content at mobalytics.gg or on this channel.